The wedding planning meeting was supposed to last an hour. 3 hours in, my sister Kavya still hadn't acknowledged my presence beyond pointing toward the kitchen when Mom asked about refreshments. Maya can handle the catering coordination, Kavya said without looking up from her Pinterest board, voice dripping with the casual dismissal I'd grown accustomed to over 29 years. She's good at organizational stuff. I refilled water glasses while Kavya held court at Mom's dining table, surrounded by wedding magazines, fabric samples, and enough venue brochures to wallpaper a small apartment. Her fiancé Rohan nodded along enthusiastically, occasionally offering suggestions that Kavya would consider for exactly 3 seconds before explaining why they wouldn't work. The Grandview estate is absolutely perfect, Kavya gushed, sliding a glossy brochure toward Mom and Aunt Priya. Look at these gardens. The ballroom holds 300 guests, there's a private bridal suite, and the mountain views are incredible. It's exactly what I've always dreamed of. Mom studied the photos with the reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts. It's gorgeous, Beta. But isn't it quite expensive? Worth every penny, Kavya declared. This is a once-in-a-lifetime event. I refuse to compromise on my vision just to save money. I paused in my water refilling duties, recognizing the Grandview estate immediately. The neoclassical mansion with its terraced gardens and panoramic mountain views was indeed stunning. I should know. I'd been its owner for the past 4 years. Maya, stop hovering and sit down, Mom chided gently. You're part of this family too. Kavya's expression suggested she found this statement debatable. Actually, Maya probably shouldn't be in the wedding party photos. You know how she photographs. I knew exactly how I photographed. Perfectly fine when I wasn't deliberately excluded from family events or relegated to behind-the-scenes roles. But arguing would only confirm their narrative that I was difficult. I could help with logistics instead, I offered, settling into the chair furthest from Kavya's planning command center. Perfect. Kavya brightened at the prospect of free labor. You can coordinate vendor deliveries, handle timeline management, maybe assist the caterers during setup. Keep things running smoothly behind the scenes. Rohan looked up from his phone where he'd been researching venue pricing. Babe, the Grandview estate starts at $50,000 for Saturday events. Are we sure about this? Kavya's smile faltered for exactly 1 second before reassembling into determined optimism. It's our dream venue, Rohan. We'll make it work. Maybe we should look at some alternatives, Aunt Priya suggested diplomatically. There are other beautiful venues that might be more budget-friendly. No. Kavya's voice carried the steel that had gotten her through law school and into her current position at a mid-tier firm. I've been planning this wedding since I was 12. The Grandview estate is perfect and I won't settle for less. She pulled up the venue's website on her laptop, narrating a virtual tour for the table. Look at the great hall with those crystal chandeliers. The ceremony can be in the rose garden, reception in the ballroom, cocktail hour on the terrace. It's like something from a fairy tale. I watched my family fall in love with a property I'd rescued from bankruptcy and transformed into one of the region's premier event destinations. They had no idea that the fairy tale they were admiring existed because I'd invested 2 years and several $1 million bringing it back to its historic grandeur. Have you contacted them yet? Mom asked. I'm calling Monday morning, Kavya said. The wedding coordinator there is supposed to be incredible. Someone named Sarah Chin who's planned events for celebrities and politicians. Sarah Chin was indeed incredible. I'd hired her personally after she'd coordinated events for 3 Fortune 500 companies and a governor's daughter. She reported directly to me through our property management company. What's your backup plan if they're booked? I asked innocently. Kavya's laugh held a note of superiority that made my teeth ache. Maya, people like me don't need backup plans. When you know what you want and you're willing to pay for quality, things work out. People like her. As opposed to people like me, presumably, those who settled for less because they couldn't recognize or afford excellence. Besides, Kavya continued, I've already checked their availability online. June 14th is open, which is perfect timing. 6 months to plan, right in peak wedding season. It's like it's meant to be. I nodded thoughtfully, mentally reviewing the booking calendar that I'd personally approved just last week. June 14th was indeed available, along with a note in the system about enhanced background checks for all bookings during peak season. My phone buzzed with an email from Sarah Chin. Venue inquiry for June 14, Kavya Patel. Shall I proceed with standard screening process? I typed back quickly, yes. Full financial verification required. The fairy tale was about to get interesting. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline autumn clarity that made me grateful for my corner office's floor-to-ceiling windows. From the 32nd floor of downtown Portland's newest high-rise, I could see the mountain range where the Grandview estate sat nestled among old-growth forests and carefully preserved meadowland. My assistant knocked and entered with the morning's priority files. Sarah Chin called about the Grandview booking inquiry. She wanted to discuss the application before proceeding. Put her through. Sarah's voice carried its usual professional warmth. Good morning, Maya. I wanted to flag the Patel inquiry before moving forward. Standard financial verification shows some concerns. I pulled up Kavya's file on my computer while Sarah outlined the situation. My sister had submitted an application claiming a household income of $180,000, respectable for most venues, but insufficient for a $50,000 event at the Grandview estate, especially when combined with existing credit obligations. She's listed her occupation as associate attorney and provided financial statements that don't quite support the booking she's requesting, Sarah continued diplomatically. Through my office's smart glass, I could see my reflection alongside the mountain views. The woman my family thought was struggling to establish herself in some computer job, while they celebrated Kavya's legal career as the family's greatest success story. What's the standard protocol for insufficient financial documentation? I asked, though I knew the answer perfectly. We require either full payment upfront, acceptable collateral, or a qualified cosigner with verified assets. Otherwise, we decline the booking and suggest more suitable alternatives. Alternatives that wouldn't include the rose garden ceremony or crystal chandelier reception that Kavya had spent Sunday evening describing in detail to anyone who'd listen. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. Kavya's so excited about calling the venue today. Fingers crossed. Crossed fingers. Follow standard protocol, I told Sarah. If she can't meet our financial requirements, provide her with our preferred vendor list for venues in her actual budget range. Understood. Should I mention that the owner sometimes makes exceptions for special circumstances? I considered this carefully. The Grandview estate operated as a business, not a charity, but I had occasionally waived deposits for non-profit events or local families facing genuine hardship. Kavya's situation was different. She could afford a beautiful wedding, just not the specific fantasy she'd decided she deserved. No exceptions this time. Standard business practices only. After ending the call, I returned to reviewing quarterly reports from my other properties. The hospitality portfolio I'd built over 8 years now included 12 venues across 3 states, from intimate boutique hotels to grand event estates. What had started as a single distressed property purchase had evolved into a comprehensive luxury hospitality company. At 2 p.m., my phone exploded with messages from the family group chat. Kavya, 2:17 p.m. This is ridiculous. The Grandview estate is being completely unreasonable about their requirements. Mom, 2:22 p.m. What happened, beta? Kavya, 2:24 p.m. They want full payment upfront or some impossible financial verification. Like we're trying to scam them or something. Rohan, 2:31 p.m. Maybe we should look at other venues. There are plenty of beautiful places that don't require jumping through hoops. Kavya, 2:33 p.m. This is our dream venue. There has to be another way. I watched the conversation unfold while reviewing the afternoon's property management reports. By 3 p.m., Kavya had convinced herself that the Grandview estate's policies were specifically designed to exclude regular people, in favor of trust fund babies and corporate events. Kavya, 3:45 p.m. I'm going to drive up there tomorrow and speak to someone in person. This whole situation is probably just a misunderstanding. Dad, 3:52 p.m. Good idea. Sometimes face-to-face conversation works better than phone calls. Aunt Priya, 4:15 p.m. Maya, you work with business systems, right? Do you know anything about event venue booking processes? I stared at the message for several minutes, considering my response. My family's assumption that I worked with business systems wasn't entirely wrong. I did work with business systems, primarily as the person who owned and operated them. Maya, 4:28 p.m. Most venues have standard financial verification processes. It's probably just business protocol. Kavya, 4:31 p.m. Maya, can you maybe help me figure out how to present our financial information more effectively? You understand corporate stuff. The irony was staggering. Kavya wanted my help navigating the financial requirements of my own venue, while remaining blissfully unaware that her corporate stuff expertise was about to meet the reality of actual corporate ownership. Maya, 4:45 p.m. I'm sure you'll figure it out. Tuesday's drive to the Grandview estate would indeed clarify the situation, though probably not in the way Kavya expected. I spent the evening reviewing guest services protocols and ensuring my staff was prepared for what promised to be a very interesting site visit. Tuesday afternoon, I sat in the Grandview estate's owner's suite, watching through privacy-tinted windows as Kavya's silver Lexus wound up the estate's tree-lined driveway. She'd arrived precisely on time for her 2 p.m. appointment, having spent the morning, according to her Instagram stories, getting her hair done and selecting an outfit that projected successful professional who deserves respect. Sarah Chin knocked and entered my office. Miss Patel has arrived. She's quite determined. I can imagine. How do you want to handle this? Standard consultation process. I'll review our policies, show her the facilities and explain the financial requirements clearly. If she becomes confrontational, I'll suggest she speak with ownership about making special arrangements. Through the window, I watched Kavya emerge from her car wearing her courtroom suit and carrying a leather portfolio that probably contained bank statements, reference letters, and whatever documentation she hoped would override business reality. Keep it professional, I said. If she asks to speak with ownership, let me know. The consultation lasted 47 minutes. I could see Sarah leading Kavya through the gardens, the ballroom and the terrace spaces that would indeed make a stunning wedding venue. Kavya's body language started confident, shifted to frustrated, and ended somewhere between desperate and furious. My office phone rang at exactly 2:47 p.m. Maya, Sarah's voice carried carefully controlled amusement. Ms. Patel would like to speak with the owner about making an exception to our financial policies. She's quite insistent that there's been some kind of misunderstanding. Send her up. I had 30 seconds to decide how to handle this moment. Stay behind my desk in full corporate authority mode, or meet her at the door like the sister she'd never recognized I'd become. Kavya knocked and entered without waiting for permission, her portfolio clutched defensively against her chest. I understand you're the owner here, and I need to explain that your staff has made some kind of mistake about. She stopped mid-sentence, staring at me with the expression of someone whose brain was refusing to process contradictory information. Maya? What are you doing here? I work here, I said simply, gesturing toward the chair across from my desk. Work here? But this is the Grandview estate. This is a luxury venue. You can't possibly. I mean, what kind of work could you? She trailed off as her gaze traveled around my office. The mahogany desk, the architectural awards on the walls, the framed photos of celebrity events we'd hosted, the business degree from Stanford that she'd never bothered to ask about. I own it, Kavya. The words hung in the air like smoke from an expensive cigar. Kavya sank into the chair without invitation, her portfolio sliding from nerveless fingers. Own it? You can't own this place. This venue costs, the booking fees alone, $50,000 for Saturday events, I confirmed. $75,000 for peak season weekends. Plus catering minimums, service charges and damage deposits. Kavya's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Finally, how long? 4 years. I bought it when the previous owners defaulted on their loans. Spent 2 years renovating, 1 year building the business reputation, and the last year enjoying consistent profitability. The silence stretched until Kavya found her voice again. The computer job? Tech consulting firm. 47 employees. $12 million in annual revenue. Her perfect wedding venue belonged to the sister she'd relegated to kitchen duties. The conversation that followed was brief and professionally courteous. I explained that the Grandview Estate's policies applied equally to all potential clients, family relationships notwithstanding. Kavya could meet our financial requirements, provide acceptable collateral, or consider venues more aligned with her actual budget. She chose option 3, storming out while muttering about family loyalty and deliberately sabotaging her wedding. Within hours, the family group chat exploded. Kavya, 4:23 p.m. Maya has been lying to us for years. She owns luxury venues and let me think I couldn't afford my dream wedding. Mom, 4:35 p.m. Maya, is this true? How could you not tell us? Dad, 4:41 p.m. We need to have a family meeting about this immediately. I responded once. The Grandview estate operates as a business, not a family favor bank. Standard policies apply to all clients. The aftermath unfolded predictably. Kavya's wedding ended up at a perfectly lovely vineyard that actually suited her budget and guest count better than our grand ballroom would have. She spent 6 months explaining to relatives why her dream venue hadn't worked out, carefully omitting the ownership details. Mom struggled with cognitive dissonance between her successful daughter and her assumptions about my computer work. Dad researched my company obsessively, trying to understand how he'd missed signs of substantial financial success. The family dynamics shifted permanently. No more requests for Maya to handle logistics or work behind the scenes. No more casual dismissals of my career or capabilities. No more assumptions about who in the family had made it and who was still figuring things out. Some revelations change everything. This one just made the truth visible.
Morning light stretched across my kitchen table, pale and thin, the kind of light that made everything look more fragile than it was. I had set down a torn sheet of paper and written 3 words in my careful block letters: bread, detergent, bank. The list was nothing special, yet the word bank seemed heavier than the rest. I read it twice, as though repetition might ease the knot in my stomach. The knock on the door came earlier than I expected. When I opened it, my father, Gerald, stood there with his broad smile, the same one he had used for decades whenever he wanted something to seem harmless. He carried no groceries, no morning paper, just that smile and an energy that felt too fast. Behind him, Elaine followed, holding a slim leather folder against her chest like a shield. "Clara," my father said, stepping in before I invited him, "we thought we'd catch you before your errands." Perfect timing. His voice was brisk, coated with warmth, but edged with something else I could not ignore. Elaine's eyes swept over the counters, the mail stacked near the sink, the half-empty cup of tea I had not yet finished. "It's a good day to get everything sorted," she added, her hand tightening on the folder. I folded the list and slipped it into my pocket. My heart tapped faster, but I kept my face still. Routine, I told myself. Just act as if it were any other morning. I moved to the cupboard for my sweater, buying myself a moment. Inside the bedroom, my hand brushed the small envelope I had hidden days ago. I slipped it into my purse and returned to the kitchen, where my father was already reaching for my car keys. My father set the leather folder on the table as if it belonged there. He tapped the cover with 2 fingers, the sound too loud in the quiet room. "It's nothing complicated, Clara," he said. "Just a few signatures to streamline the accounts. Keeps the bank from calling you with questions. You'll thank me later." Elaine pulled out a chair and sat close, the folder pressed between us. Her perfume drifted sharp and sweet, making the air feel smaller. She placed her hand lightly on my elbow, but her grip tightened until the bone ached. She didn't look at me. She looked at my father as if waiting for her cue. I smiled thinly, though my chest tightened. These were old tactics. After my mother's funeral, I'd seen them unfold again and again, my father arranging the estate, helping me manage bills I could have handled myself, speaking to bankers on my behalf while I stood silent at his side. He had convinced me then that he was protecting me. I was older now, but the pressure carried the same weight. "I'll need a minute before we leave," I said, pushing back my chair. Elaine's fingers released, leaving a faint throb in my arm. My father's smile didn't falter, but his eyes followed me down the hall. In the bedroom, I opened the drawer of my nightstand. Beneath folded scarves lay the envelope I had prepared. Plain, sealed, my handwriting across the front 4 words. I held it for a second, steadying my breath. My plan was small, but it was mine. I slid it into my purse, next to my wallet and ID, and closed the drawer without a sound. When I returned, My father was already standing by the door, car keys in hand, his smile still polished, as though nothing had been decided yet. The morning air was sharp as we stepped outside, and my father jingled the car keys like it was his right to hold them. "I'll drive," he said, opening the door before I could protest. I slid into the back seat, purse clutched tight against me. Elaine took the passenger seat, the folder never leaving her grip. As we pulled onto the narrow street, my father filled the silence with the kind of talk that was meant to sound harmless. The hardware store's running a sale this week. Good deals on ladders, and the weather's turning early. Feels like fall already. He spoke with that tone he used on Neighbors, the one that disguised command as friendliness. I watched the houses pass, porches draped with late summer flowers, the sidewalks damp from sprinklers. Each turn brought us closer to Congress Street, closer to the bank. My fingers tapped against the strap of my purse. I told myself to breathe slowly. Elaine shifted in her seat and opened the folder on her lap. She angled it so I could see. "These are the forms," she said lightly. "Nothing complicated. They just keep everything in one place. Less stress for you." She tapped a line with her manicured finger. "Initial here. It just means they can talk to me if they need anything." My eyes followed her hand. At the top of the page, the words were printed in heavy black letters, "Power of Attorney." The phrase seemed to thicken the air around me. I didn't point to it. I didn't argue. I let the folder stay open a moment longer before I looked away. My father glanced at me through the rear-view mirror, his eyes catching mine. "You taught me that family takes care of each other," he said. His voice was almost soft, but the words pressed down with weight. I turned my gaze to the line of storefronts coming into view, their windows bright in the morning sun. The corner of the bank appeared just beyond, its glass front reflecting the sky. My father's hand tightened on the wheel as he steered us into the lot. The parking lot was half full, the kind of weekday morning bustle I had expected. My father parked close to the entrance and stepped out quickly, circling the car before I even reached for the handle. He pulled my door open with exaggerated care. "Careful," he said, as if I were fragile, as if his hand hadn't just steered me here. The glass doors of the River Street branch glinted with a reflection of sky. Inside, the air was cooler, scented faintly of coffee and polished floors. People moved quietly between counters, faces bent toward their errands. I walked between my father and Elaine, their presence pressing me inward like walls. At the teller line, a young woman with kind eyes glanced up. Her name tag read Maya. Her smile faltered just slightly when her gaze landed on the faint bruise along my forearm, the one Elaine's grip had left behind days ago. In that pause, I felt seen, if only for a heartbeat, before her expression smoothed back into professional calm. My father guided me toward a low table in the waiting area, setting the leather folder down with purpose. He slipped a pen into my hand before I had even sat. His voice dropped low. The cheer gone. "Just sign, Clara. It's routine. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Elaine sat close, closer than comfort allowed. Her hand returned to my elbow, the pressure sharper now, her perfume filling the air between us. She leaned in, whispering words only I could hear. "One signature and it's done. Don't fight it." I looked at the pen resting against my fingers. Nights of planning flickered through my mind, the envelope in my purse, the quiet rehearsals of what I would do when the moment came. I had told myself over and over not to freeze, not to fold. I lifted my eyes from the table to the far wall, steadying my breath. I counted slowly in my head, the way I had practiced 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. My pulse eased, my grip loosened, and the fear that threatened to hollow me out began to recede. Across the lobby, a door clicked open, and the branch manager stepped forward. Julia Brooks appeared in the lobby with the quiet authority of someone who had walked this floor for years. Her navy jacket was neat, her badge clipped straight. She smiled warmly. addressing my father first, then letting her eyes settle on me a second longer than courtesy required. "Why don't we bring these papers to a desk?" she suggested. "It's always easier to review in private." My father nodded quickly, eager to move things forward. Elaine rose beside him, folder tight under her arm. I followed, my purse close to my side, my breath measured. As Julia led us toward her office, she paused briefly at the teller counter. "Maya, could you bring me a water in a few minutes?" she asked. The words ordinary, but the glance she gave was not. Maya inclined her head almost imperceptibly. A signal received. Inside the office, Julia gestured toward the chairs. My father pulled one close for me, pressing the pen into my hand again. "Go ahead, Clara," he murmured, lowering his voice to what he must have thought sounded kind. "It's routine." Elaine sat on my other side, her hand finding my arm once more. Julia settled across from us. "Let me just make copies of the documents for our file," she said, holding out her hand. My father hesitated, then placed the folder on the table. As Julia opened it, I reached into my purse. My fingers brushed the smooth envelope, the edges worn from my rehearsals. I pulled it out carefully and slid it beneath my ID and deposit slip as if it were part of the routine stack. "Here are my documents," I said, voice steady, handing them across. Julia accepted them without pause. For a moment, her gaze met mine. Nothing in her expression shifted, yet I felt a thread stretch between us. She rose, sleeve brushing the edge of the folder, and left the office with measured steps. My father leaned closer, whispering, "Almost done now." I kept my eyes fixed on the door Julia had just closed, listening for the faint click of the copier down the hall. The office was small, walled in glass, the door closing with a soft click. A white noise machine hummed faintly from the corner. My father sat across from me, the folder spread open like an invitation and a threat at once. He pushed the pen toward me again. "It's routine, Clara. You're making this bigger than it is." Elaine leaned in from my side, her hand curling around my forearm. Her nails pressed hard enough to blanch the skin. "Don't stall," she whispered. "Just sign." The perfume clung to her, heavy and sharp, choking the air between us. Julia moved with calm efficiency, taking a chair at the corner of the table. She didn't reach for the pen, didn't glance at the forms. Instead, her tone was light, conversational. "Before we begin, let me make copies of everyone's IDs for our file. It's standard for all document reviews." She looked directly at me when she said it. "Miss Henley, may I see yours?" I drew in a breath, slipped my hand into my purse, and felt for the items in their order. My wallet came out first. I placed my driver's license on the table, then laid my deposit slip on top of it, as if it were habit. Last, with a motion rehearsed in countless late-night hours, I slid the plain envelope beneath them. "Here are my documents," I said, my voice steady. My father leaned back, relieved, certain I had yielded. Elaine eased her grip, though her hand still lingered against my arm. Julia gathered the small stack without the slightest hesitation. Her eyes brushed mine for half a second, no shift in expression, no sign to anyone watching. But I felt it, the acknowledgement. She walked to the door and stepped into the hallway. The faint sound of the copier started a moment later. My father exhaled, tapping the pen against the papers as if marking the rhythm of his victory. "See?" he said, voice low. "We're almost finished." I kept my gaze fixed on the glass wall, where Julia's figure passed by once, her hand at her side, her expression composed. My pulse steadied, not from surrender but from the knowledge that my note was no longer mine, alone. Julia returned with the folder and a small stack of copies, her movements even, her smile undisturbed. She set everything neatly on the table and folded her hands. "Before we proceed," she said, "we'll need to verify some information with the account holder directly. It's part of our Know Your Customer requirements. For a few minutes, I'll need to speak with Miss Henley alone." My father gave a short laugh, the kind meant to dismiss without asking permission. "She's hard of hearing sometimes. I'll help her through it." Julia didn't waver. I'll call you right back in. This part is required by regulation. She nodded toward the hallway, her voice still calm, her eyes steady. Elaine's fingers tightened once more on my arm before slipping away. We'll wait outside, she said brightly, but her glance cut sharp as glass. The door closed behind them, and the office grew still. Julia leaned forward, her tone softer now. Clara, I read your note. My chest felt tight, but I held her gaze. She continued, voice low and steady. I need to ask you 3 questions, and you can answer yes or no or explain more if you want. First, are you being pressured to sign documents you don't want to sign? Yes, I whispered. Second, do you understand that these forms would give control of your money and your house to your father and stepmother? Yes. Third, do you feel safe at home with them visiting you? I looked down at my hands, the pale ridge of my thumbnail catching the light. No, Julia gave a small nod. No surprise in her face, only resolve. She reached for the phone on her desk and dialed with precise fingers. Her words were clipped. Exact. This is River Street Branch. We have a senior customer under duress. Possible fraudulent power of attorney. Initiating hold, requesting compliance review, and contacting Portland police. She hung up, then met my eyes again. You did the right thing, she said quietly. The sound of footsteps in the hall told me my father and Elaine were waiting just beyond the glass. The door opened, and Julia invited my father and Elaine back inside. They returned to their seats, my father settling heavily, Elaine smoothing her skirt with unnecessary precision. Julia placed a small recorder on the table and pressed a button. For accuracy, we record document reviews, she said. It protects all parties. My father forced a laugh. Fine, let's move along. Clara knows we're just simplifying things. He nudged the folder toward Julia. Julia opened it carefully, scanning the first page. Her eyes lingered at the corner where the notary stamp bled unevenly into the paper. She flipped another page, her tone mild. And who prepared these forms? Mobile notary, Elaine said quickly. Perfectly standard. Julia nodded as if taking note, but I caught the flicker of doubt in her eyes. She placed the document flat on the table. This seal number doesn't align with our records. We'll confirm shortly with compliance. My father's jaw tightened. It's valid. We wouldn't waste time here otherwise. His voice had risen, sharp enough to cut the room in half. Elaine reached for his arm, her smile fixed. Gerald. Let her check. No harm in that. Her voice was smooth, but the tremor in her hand betrayed her. Across the glass wall, I noticed the guard shift near the entrance. A faint click sounded doors locked. Motion steady. Unnoticed by most, Julia continued. Undisturbed. Before we proceed, I'll also need Clara's responses in her own words. She turned her gaze to me. Patient. Unwavering. I felt my father's stare like a weight against my cheek. Elaine's perfume clung too close. My throat tightened, but my voice held. These forms give them control over my money and my house. Julia inclined her head, marking the words. From outside, faint but steady, came the rising wail of sirens threading through Portland streets. Inside, my father shifted in his chair, the sound of the pen tapping against the table betraying his growing unease. The sirens cut off outside, and moments later 2 officers stepped into the branch. Julia opened the office door and introduced them as Officers Ramirez and Chin. Their presence was steady, not loud, filling the space with a different kind of authority. Ramirez took a seat near me while Chin remained standing, her eyes sweeping the room. Ma'am, Ramirez said gently. Are you all right? I nodded, then lifted my sleeve to show the fading bruise along my arm. Elaine squeezed me, I said. My voice was quiet, but the recorder on the table caught every word. Elaine's mouth tightened, though she said nothing. My father leaned back, shaking his head. She bruises easily. This is all exaggerated. I ignored him and reached for the tie pin fastened at my collar. This records, I explained, unclipping it with careful hands. It caught everything from the moment we left my house. Julia accepted it with a nod, placing it beside the folder. She answered a call from compliance on her desk phone, listening intently. "Understood," she said at last, then turned back to the officers. "The notary commission listed here does not exist. It's a forgery." My father's face reddened, a mix of anger and disbelief. "That's ridiculous," he snapped. Julia ignored him, opening a separate folder she had kept aside. "There's something else. 3 weeks ago, Clara executed a living trust. Her assets, including her home, are already inside. She and her brother Daniel serve as co-trustees." The words settled heavy in the room. My father stared at me as if I had spoken a foreign language. "You did this behind my back. I did it to protect myself," I said. "Steady now." No tremor left. The silence that followed was broken only by the soft hum of the white noise machine, carrying us into the final reckoning. The officers stood, their decision made, and asked my father and Elaine to rise. My father sputtered about family business. Elaine demanded a lawyer, but neither could stop the inevitable. They were escorted out, their voices trailing into the lobby until the door clicked behind them. Julia gathered the documents into a neat stack and slid them toward me. "We'll preserve everything for the investigation," she said. Her calm steadied me when my own knees felt weak. I thanked her quietly, words barely carrying the weight I wanted them to. Outside, the afternoon light seemed brighter than when I'd walked in. Daniel was waiting in his truck, having come at Julia's call. He helped me in, his hand firm at my shoulder, and drove me home without a word. The silence was not empty. It was protective. At the house, Daniel moved with purpose. He changed the locks, installed a small camera above the porch, and checked every window latch as though sealing a fortress. I made tea, letting the kettle's whistle remind me of ordinary sounds. We sat together at the kitchen table, the same place where the day had begun, though everything felt different now. I took out a sheet of paper and wrote slowly, my hand no longer trembling. "Dad, I love you. I want you to find help. But you cannot touch my money, my house, or my life. If you try again, I will call the police again." I signed my name and folded the letter, placing it in the drawer beside my list from that morning. The house was quiet, but this time it was safe. My hands rested on the table, steady at last, ready for what came next. They called my name, and I rose from the third row in a sea of caps and gowns. My palms were damp against the edge of my robe. I could see Dean Hartford waiting at the center of the stage, hand-extended smile ready. I took 2 steps forward, and that's when I heard her voice. She cheated her way through college. It came sharp, slicing through the ceremony like glass. The auditorium froze. My head turned instinctively before I could stop myself. She was standing Callie midway up the aisle, one hand clenched around the program, the other pointed directly at me. She lied. She stole. Ask the registrar if she ever even earned her credits. Gasps fluttered across the room. A couple of people shifted in their seats. Phones came up like reflexes. I felt 400 eyes dart from her to me. My breath caught somewhere between my ribs and my throat. Dean Hartford's hand mid-air slowly lowered. His expression changed, not disbelief, not anger, just concern. "The kind that makes you feel 10 years old again." Callie's voice rose louder. "She's a fraud, and everyone's just handing her a degree like she didn't lie to get here." My shoes felt stapled to the carpet. For a second, I couldn't tell if my legs had gone numb or if I simply refused to move. Beside me, another graduate whispered, "Oh my God," and somewhere near the back, someone laughed nervously. I swallowed hard. Then I walked. 1 step, then another. Not fast, not slow, just forward. I didn't look back. Dean Hartford didn't move until I reached him. He held out the diploma. My fingers trembled as I took it. "Miss Ellison," he said quietly, "would you like to continue?" I nodded. The microphone stood beside us. I could see its red light blinking live. I turned to the audience, to the phones. to my sister still yelling, and I stepped up to the mic. The whispering didn't stop at first. You could still hear people murmuring, adjusting in their seats, speculating, but then I cleared my throat, and they did. They stopped. I looked across the auditorium, not for defense, not for permission, but because I had something to say. "I've been accused of being a fraud," I said. My voice didn't shake, and I could spend the next 5 minutes trying to prove that I'm not, but I won't. My fingers tightened around the edge of the podium. Because this moment isn't about her. I didn't name her. I didn't have to. This moment is about every paper I wrote at 2 a.m. after closing the cafe. Every exam I studied for after my shift. Every time I didn't quit because I couldn't afford to. I paused. Somewhere a phone clicked into silence. "I'm not here to convince you of anything. I'm here because I earned it." The auditorium went still. Even Callie's voice had gone quiet, or maybe I'd just stopped hearing it. I turned back to Dean Hartford. "Thank you," I said softly, and we shook hands. Then I walked off stage and into the hallway, still holding my diploma like a question I'd finally answered. I didn't cry after the ceremony, not even when I was alone in the hallway holding a diploma in one hand and a phone buzzing with half-hearted apologies in the other. I just sat on a bench near the exit door's coat draped over my lap, letting the cold air from outside settle on my skin like a reset. Callie's voice still rang in my ears, but the words weren't new. They'd just never been said so loudly. She used to say things like that behind closed doors sarcastically with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Leora always lands on her feet," she'd mutter, or, "You know how it is when you're the golden one." As if getting through college with part-time jobs and rejected FAFSA appeals was some kind of unfair advantage. What she didn't say at graduation was that she had dropped out of law school after one semester, that she'd blamed the professors, the cost our mother, everyone but herself. After our dad died, she'd stepped up, briefly paid a few bills, made a few phone calls. She liked being the one who held things together. But as soon as the checks stopped and the grief settled, she vanished. I was 19 when she moved out, leaving a Post-it note on the fridge and a box of half-packed dishes. She said she needed space. I needed money. So I stayed enrolled in full-time classes and picked up 2 jobs, morning shifts at a bakery and evenings tutoring high school kids in math. Callie didn't ask how I managed it. She just told people I was the ambitious one. Her voice always curled around the word like it was a slur. What she didn't say at graduation was that I hadn't spoken to her in nearly a year. The last time she called was to ask if she could borrow the password to our dad's old banking app, just to check something she'd said. What she didn't say was that she hadn't congratulated me, not when I got the internship, not when I got the research grant, not once in 4 years. So no, the outburst wasn't surprising. What caught me off guard was the timing. She waited until the mic was on, until the lights were bright, until the moment wasn't hers, just to make sure it wouldn't be mine either. I should have known then that what happened on stage was only the beginning. I stood there for a moment longer after the mic went quiet, the last of my words still hovering in the air. "Some lies don't need to be shouted down," I had said. "They collapse on their own." A few heads turned toward Callie, now seated again, arms crossed, eyes hard. Others looked at Dean Hartford, who nodded slightly as if to say, "That's enough." Then claps. Not loud, not immediate. Just a handful of people who had waited. A professor in the front row. A classmate I didn't know well. Jess, my roommate, standing and clapping like she was trying to hold up the roof by herself. I didn't bow. I didn't smile. I just walked off stage, diploma in hand, spine straight. It felt like carrying a flag through enemy lines. Outside, the sun was sharp and cold. Families were already spilling out onto the steps, calling names, taking photos. Laughter and camera flashes and someone yelling, "Over here, Grandma." I slipped past them all down the side ramp, past a group of undergrads I didn't recognize. One of them whispered something, and I caught only the word cheated. It wasn't a question. I kept walking until I reached the edge of the quad near the old science building where I used to nap between tutoring sessions. I sat down on a low stone wall and checked my phone. Jess had texted Screw Her. "You were brilliant. Then come meet us later." You don't have to say a word. Just be with people who know. There were others. Professor Klein, proud of you. My TA from stats. Anyone watching you for the last 4 years knows the truth. One number I didn't recognize. We've never met. I was in the back row. Just wanted you to know I believed you. I exhaled. Not relief. Just breath. The diploma was still in my lap, warm from my hands. I ran my fingers over the embossed lettering not to admire it, but to make sure it was still there. Some part of me kept expecting it to disappear, but it didn't. And neither did what came next. I didn't stay at the after party. I didn't answer Jess's texts or stop by the cafe where my classmates were gathering in caps and sneakers and borrowed joy. I took the bus home diploma tucked in my coat like a secret I wasn't sure I'd earned. Inside my apartment, I didn't turn on the lights. I just walked straight to the bookshelf and pulled out the bottom drawer, the one with the false back. Behind a stack of notebooks was a locked file pouch, thin gray, unmarked. The key was taped under the drawer. Inside were papers I hadn't looked at in months. Copies of financial aid statements, screenshots of disappearing balances, a typed report with a plain title: Preliminary Findings, Ellison Case. It had started in sophomore year when my scholarship check bounced. The financial aid office had no explanation. An issue with the account, they said, eyes darting, voices low. I didn't qualify for more grants. They suggested a loan. I picked up a second job instead. That same semester, I logged into the old bank account my grandfather had opened for my education. The balance was wrong. Way too low. At first, I thought it was interest or maybe a mistake. Then I saw the withdrawals. $3,500 here, $6,200 there, over and over, always in round numbers. Transfers to a secondary account I didn't recognize. I stared at the screen until it blurred. The only other person who had ever had access to that account was Callie. Our dad had added her when he got sick just in case. He never thought she'd need to be removed. I remembered sitting across from Frankie Dillard for the first time, an ex-cop turned small-town investigator who now specialized in quiet fraud. He didn't flinch when I told him it might be my sister. He took the case. 2 months later, he handed me a file and said, "You're not wrong. But it's worse than you think. Callie had forged my name, bank forms, authorization letters, even my scholarship appeal. Over $28,000 gone. Now with my diploma in one hand and the file in the other, I knew her outburst at graduation wasn't about anger. It was a distraction. She'd spent years stealing from me, and now she was trying to make sure no one believed me when I finally spoke. 2 days after graduation, I walked into Dean Hartford's office with the file pressed flat between my palms. I didn't have an appointment. His assistant hesitated until I said my name. Then she nodded once quietly and waved me through. He stood when I entered, gesturing to the seat across from his desk like we were equals now. "Leora," he said carefully, "I was hoping I'd hear from you." I didn't say anything at first. I just opened the folder and began laying out the documents. One by one, bank statements, forged authorization forms, notarized handwriting comparisons, Frankie's report, the dates, the totals. By the time I placed the last page down, Dean Hartford's expression had shifted from curiosity to something sharper, but not doubt. He looked at me and said, "I saw the way you stood on that stage. I believed you before you even spoke." He leaned back, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "This is serious. And very thorough." I nodded. He took a moment, then asked, "What do you want to do with this? I want it on record," I said. "Not just for me. I need someone official to know that what she said wasn't just a lie, it was cover." He picked up one of the documents, read a few lines, then set it down. "I can write a letter confirming your academic integrity and help you submit a report to the university's legal counsel. But this," he tapped the forged bank form, "this is criminal. You should consider going to court." I didn't flinch. I already have a lawyer. I just needed someone to believe me first. "I do," he said simply. He reached for a pen. I watched as he signed his name across the top of the letterhead. The first piece of official truth. Something no whisper could erase. By the time I left the building, I had a signed statement in my bag and a court intake form waiting in my inbox. The paperwork was filed on a Thursday. My lawyer, Samantha Cray, handled the filing with a calm efficiency that felt almost surgical. She was sharp-eyed, soft-voiced, and had already flagged 3 inconsistencies in Callie's bank activity before we even finished the intake forms. Civil fraud, identity theft, financial misappropriation, she'd said, flipping through the binder. We'll start with the civil case. Criminal referrals come later. That evening, I sat by the window with my phone on the table waiting. At 6:42 p.m., it rang. Her number. I hit record before I picked up. "What the hell is this?" Callie's voice was already raised. "Some stranger just handed me a letter at my door." "Are you insane? Did you read it?" I asked. "Of course I read it." "A lawsuit for what?" "Trying to keep our family from falling apart." I said nothing. "You know I accessed that account to make sure it didn't get wasted. You were too young to manage that money. You weren't even using it right." I didn't respond. Just let the silence do its work. "You're seriously doing this," she snapped. "You're dragging me through court because I helped you." "You forged my name," I said quietly. "And you're throwing away everything Dad built over what some stupid account Samantha listened to the recording later that night." She gave us everything she said, nearly smiling. "That's gold in court." I saved the audio and backed it up twice. The next day, Samantha filed the recording as supporting evidence. Callie's voice, so practiced, so sure, sounded different when written out in legal print. Every justification, every half-denial, every word. It was all there now. She had spent years rewriting the story. But this time, the version that counted was mine. The news moved faster than I expected. Within days of the papers being served, I started getting calls numbers I hadn't seen in years lighting up my screen. Aunt Daphne was the first. "I need to talk to you," she said. Her voice was thin, like it had been kept in a drawer too long. "I should have told you earlier. We met at a coffee shop on Willow and 3rd Neutral Ground." She brought a manila envelope and didn't touch her drink. "When your dad died, Callie told me you needed time to grieve, that I shouldn't bother you. Then she asked to borrow $8,000 to help with tuition. Said the school was threatening to revoke your spot." I blinked. "She told me you moved away and didn't want contact." Aunt Daphne shook her head. "I wired her the money." Never heard from her again. She opened the envelope bank slips. Old emails, a printed note in Callie's handwriting thanking her for protecting the family legacy. "I stayed quiet," she said, "because I wanted to believe she was helping you." That night I got a message from Clara, a girl I hadn't talked to since high school. "Hey, weird question. Did you ever get the money I lent Callie?" She said it was for your housing deposit. I gave her 4 Kalers my freshman year. There were more, a former tutor, a neighbor from 3 blocks over, each with the same pattern, a version of me in distress. Callie, the loyal sister, stepping in to solve it, just needing a little help, just needing funds. She hadn't been angry at graduation because she thought I cheated. She'd been angry because her cover story was collapsing. This wasn't just resentment, it was theft wrapped in sisterhood. A con built on my silence. She didn't just lie about me. She made me the lie. And now that I was telling the truth, the version of me she'd invented couldn't survive. The courtroom smelled like old paper and cold air. I sat in the front row alone, my hands folded over a plain blue folder. Across the aisle, Callie breezed in wearing a navy suit and heels too high for the polished floors. Her lawyer, all cufflinks and charm, held her elbow like they were walking into a press conference. She didn't look at me. I didn't expect her to. When the hearing began, the judge reviewed everything methodically, line by line. Bank records, signatures, audio, transcripts. My name, her name. The same forms signed in different hands. Callie's lawyer leaned into sympathy, then logic. "This is a misunderstanding," he said smoothly. "An older sister stepping in to help when her sibling wasn't mature enough to manage finances. Any actions taken were out of concern, not deceit." Then Callie took the stand. She spoke about loyalty, about family, about sacrifice, about how she'd shielded me from the burden of money. Her voice was low, almost tender, but the documents didn't bend to her performance. The judge asked her to explain the offshore account in her name. The 5 separate withdrawals after she'd stopped speaking to me, the handwritten notebook found in her apartment filled with my forged signature. Callie didn't have answers. When it was my turn, I said only what mattered. I worked 2 jobs to replace what she stole, I told the court. I didn't file this out of revenge. I filed it because truth deserves more than silence. The room stayed quiet as the judge read the ruling. The court found in my favor. Damages awarded. Referral for criminal review. I didn't look at Callie as I left the room. I didn't need to. That silence. It wasn't empty. It was honest. A week after the ruling, my uncle showed up at my apartment with a manila envelope and an apology he didn't quite know how to give. "This was in your grandfather's desk," he said. "I didn't know he'd written you anything." The envelope was thin, the handwriting unmistakably, his sharp, deliberate, exact. Inside was a single page. "Leora, if you're reading this, something has gone wrong that I hoped never would, but I trust you. Use what's left of this money to create something that can't be stolen, something that will outlast the ones who tried to take it. With all my belief in you, Granddad, I sat on the edge of the couch, the letter in my lap, the court check still sealed on the table beside me. 30 minutes later, I was online researching how to start a nonprofit. The first call I made was to a local legal clinic. The second was to my old professor, the one who always said resilience wasn't just survival, it was strategy. Within a month, the paperwork was filed. I named it the Ellison Resilience Trust, a small foundation, quietly built, meant for women who had lost access to family support emotionally, financially, or both. It would offer microgrants for college housing deposits, legal aid. Not huge, not flashy, just enough to start. I didn't need to build something that impressed anyone. I needed to build something that restored. And in doing so, I finally felt like I had. 1 year later, I stood behind the same podium where my world had once cracked open. The auditorium looked almost identical rows of polished chairs, the soft echo of footsteps, the distant hum of the air vents. But this time there was no fear in my throat. No one whispering, no one yelling. This time I'd been invited. The Ellison Resilience Trust had just awarded its first 5 scholarships. One of the recipients, a girl named Maribel, had hugged me so tightly after the announcement I could barely breathe. She reminded me of myself, sharp-eyed, quietly determined, carrying more than she admitted. I was the closing speaker. I didn't read from notes. I stood here once before I began, but not like this. Back then, I was trying to hold myself together while someone tried to tear me apart. Today, I don't need to hold anything together. I'm whole. I spoke about Callie, but briefly. Not to vilify her, but to name the wound. Then, I spoke about what came after. The hours spent building something small but solid. The messages from women who had no one. The dignity of being believed. I'm not here to relive what happened, I said. I'm here because it didn't end me. The room stayed still, not with tension, but with respect. I thought she stole my story. But this mic, it was always mine. The glass walls of Portland International Airport reflected back a family that was not really mine. My father strode ahead, rolling a sleek black suitcase. Celine, his new wife, walked beside him, her sunglasses perched high in her hair. Drew and Piper, her children, kept close behind, talking in low voices about resorts and snorkeling trips. I trailed last, clutching a modest carry-on that suddenly felt out of place among their polished luggage. At the check-in counter, Richard the agent in his crisp navy jacket stacked the passports neatly. I counted them without meaning to. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. My stomach tightened. There should have been 6. "Excuse me," I said, trying to steady my voice. "What about mine?" The agent scanned the screen. Puzzled. "I only see 5 passengers booked on this reservation." My father cleared his throat. "Mariel, step aside for a moment." He guided me away from the line, his hand firm on my elbow. For a heartbeat, I thought he might explain, maybe apologize for an oversight. Instead, he reached into his wallet, pulled out a wad of bills, and pressed it into my palm. $200. "You'll figure it out." His tone was casual, as if I had misplaced a homework assignment, not my place in our family. I stared at the money, the edges dampening in my clenched hand. "You're serious?" He gave a shrug that I would remember for the rest of my life. "Mrs. Turner next door has a spare key. You'll be fine." Then he turned, rejoined Celine and her children, and disappeared with them into the security line. I stood rooted to the polished floor of Gate 24, the crowd pressing around me, my suitcase by my feet, while the boarding passes rustled like proof that I was already erased. Time at Gate 24 slowed into something unbearable. The departure board flipped letters, announcing flights for families who actually belonged together. I tried my father's number 3 times, then Celine's once. Each call slid to voicemail. Texts came back marked as delivered but never answered. My suitcase sat beside me like an accusation. By the second hour, I had run out of excuses to myself. Maybe they'd come back. Maybe this was a mistake. But the truth was clear: the trip to Fiji had always been meant for 5, not 6. I drifted to the food court just to look busy. A woman wiping tables stopped in front of me. Her badge read Angela. She studied my face, then set down a bag of pretzels. "On the house. You look like you could use something." The kindness broke me open. I muttered thanks, fighting tears, and sat with the bag untouched. My phone battery blinked red. I scrolled through my contacts, the list thinning like a lifeline. Friends from Portland had faded after the move. Dad's side of the family was out of the question. And then I saw her name Mom. It had been more than 3 years since I dared call. She lived in Santa Fe, a desert city that belonged to another life. I hovered over the button, every muscle in me recoiling at the thought of her disappointment. But panic pressed harder. The phone rang once, twice, and then, hello. The voice was unmistakable, cautious, older than I remembered. I froze, words stuck in my throat. "Who is this?" "It's me," I whispered. "It's Marielle." A long pause, then a sound that might have been relief breaking. "Marielle, sweetheart, where are you at the airport?" "Dad left me here." Her tone hardened, all hesitation gone. "Stay put. I'm coming." For the first time all day, I let myself believe I might not be alone. By the time Elena found me at the curb outside the terminal, dawn was beginning to blur the sky over Portland. Her old Toyota bore the dust of a night spent pushing past mile markers. She stepped out stiffly, scanning for me as though I might still vanish. When her eyes landed on mine, something flickered: relief, guilt, hesitation. The hug she gave was awkward, not the kind that collapses years of distance. But I held on anyway. Neither of us knew what to say. So we didn't. I slid into the passenger seat, the smell of coffee clinging to the cup holder between us, and we began the long drive south. Hours of asphalt unrolled through Oregon and New Mexico, broken by silence, gas station stops, and her attempts at small talk. She asked about school. I mumbled half answers. I asked about her job at the gallery. She nodded, said it kept her busy. We were careful with each other, like people testing thin ice. Her house in Santa Fe was small, adobe walls the color of baked clay, with creaking floorboards that gave away every step. My room there had once been mine, years ago, though now it felt like a guest room hastily prepared. As I unpacked the little I had brought, I opened the desk drawers looking for space. That's when I found them. A stack of envelopes bound with a rubber band. Each one bore my name in familiar handwriting, my father's, birthday cards, holiday notes, even short letters filled with small details about his life. Some sounded warm, hopeful. Others slipped in subtle digs about Elena, urging me to remember who really cared. My hands trembled as I flipped through them. Why had she never given these to me? Had he really tried? Or was this another performance meant to keep me tethered? I carried the bundle into the living room. Elena looked at them, her face draining of color. She reached for words, but stopped, as if afraid they would shatter between us. I realized in that moment I didn't know which of them had lied more, only that the truth was heavier than I was ready for. Elena didn't waste time. 2 mornings after I arrived, she drove me to a brick office building off Agua Fria Street where Judith Harlow kept her practice. Judith was a woman in her 50s with iron gray hair pulled back neatly. the kind of presence that made silence feel deliberate rather than awkward. She shook my hand, looked me directly in the eye, and said, "I'm glad you came." Elena laid out the envelopes I'd found, the cards and letters Dad had written. Judith examined them carefully before sliding a folder across the desk. Inside were fresh statements, an airline clerk's affidavit, a copy of my boarding record, and stills from the security footage at Portland International. There I was, standing alone at Gate 24 while my father moved on without me. "Legally," Judith explained, "this is abandonment. A minor left without supervision at a transportation hub is considered endangered. Child Protective Services will want to investigate." The words felt clinical, but their weight landed heavy. Abandonment. Endangered. Terms I had read in articles about other people now circled back with my name attached. That afternoon, a caseworker from CPS came by Elena's house. She asked gentle but precise questions, noting everything in a small tablet: what time my father left, how much money he gave me, whether he had arranged care in his absence. Each answer felt like another layer of paint on a portrait I didn't want hanging in any courtroom. But what unsettled me most wasn't the paperwork or the prospect of hearings. It was the ache that kept surfacing beneath my anger. Part of me still pictured my father walking back through the airport doors, saying it was a mistake, that he hadn't meant it. That part of me hated the evidence because it made forgiveness impossible. When the caseworker left, Judith assured us the law was on our side. Elena looked relieved. I felt split open, caught between proof of betrayal and a craving for the approval of the man who had caused it. I knew the next step would be facing him not as a daughter, but as a witness. With Judith's guidance and the paperwork filed, we drove north to Portland under legal clearance to collect my things. The highway felt endless, each mile pulling me back toward a house I no longer wanted to call home. Elena tried to make conversation comments about the landscape, questions about music I liked, but the silence between us always returned. We were bound together by necessity, not comfort. The Ashford house loomed at the edge of a manicured neighborhood, its windows glinting in the gray Oregon light. Unlocking the door with the key still on my chain felt surreal. It was my home on paper, but stepping inside felt like trespassing. The air smelled faintly of Celine's perfume, sharp and unfamiliar. I led Elena upstairs to my room, tucked at the far end of the hall. The door creaked as it opened. Compared to Drew's posters plastered across his walls and Piper's fairy lights strung above her bed, my space looked temporary, like a hotel room someone had stayed in too long. Neutral walls, a narrow bed, and a desk with little more than a lamp. No photographs of me hung in the hallway we'd passed. No trace that I belonged here. I began pulling clothes from drawers, folding them into boxes. At the bottom of the desk, I felt something catch a shallow drawer that stuck slightly when I pulled. Inside was a stack of envelopes, worn from years of being shoved aside. My name was written across each one in Elena's careful script. My breath caught. I tore one open. Inside was a birthday card from when I turned 12, bright with glitter but never delivered. Another envelope held a letter from her explaining why she had moved to Santa Fe, saying she wanted me to visit, that she still loved me. All of it hidden from me, tucked away where I'd never look. The room swayed as I sank into the chair. First, the bundle of Dad's letters concealed by Elena, and now this, Elena's words kept from me by Dad. Lies nested inside lies, both of them controlling which truths I was allowed to know. Elena stepped into the doorway, her face tightening as she saw the envelopes in my hands. I couldn't decide if I felt more betrayed by her silence or by his theft, only that I had never felt so split in two. We had finished loading the last box into the mover's van when I glanced back at the front porch. A bright paper was taped across the double doors, sealed with the state's crest. Judith had explained it would be posted as part of the protective order notification of the ongoing investigation and restrictions on my father's contact with me. It looked stark against the polished wood, like graffiti no one in this neighborhood expected to see. 2 days later, word reached us that my father and Celine had returned from Fiji. According to Judith, They had been met at their own doorstep, not with a welcome home, but with the notice. I pictured him reading the words, his face going red, while Celine's lips tightened into that thin, disapproving line she used whenever reality broke through her curated world. The first call came within the hour. He left a voicemail, his voice booming with fury. "Mariel, how could you do this after everything I've given you? You've let her poison you against me. You're being ungrateful, vindictive." He spoke as if the abandonment at the airport had been an oversight, a lesson blown out of proportion, rather than the core of the matter. Celine tried her own angle. An email, carefully worded, dripping with concern. She wrote that the family was embarrassed, that the neighbors were already whispering, that it would be better for everyone if we handled this quietly. Her reputation was clearly more fragile to her than my safety. The cracks between them began to show through these messages. His anger burned hot, all about control and image, while hers trembled under the weight of social standing. For once, their voices were not united. I listened to both and felt a strange calm settle in. The notice on the door had done what I could not. It stripped away the illusion that they were untouchable. My father was no longer just the architect with the perfect life. He was a man whose own facade was beginning to collapse, and I knew the next confrontation would have to be face to face. The first therapy session with Elena took place in a quiet office tucked behind a bookstore off Canyon Road. The walls were lined with shelves of well-worn novels, and the therapist, Dr. Mendoza, had a voice so steady it felt like it could hold weight without judgment. Still, I found myself crossing my arms, unsure of how much I wanted to reveal. Elena tried, in halting sentences, to explain why she hadn't fought harder for me after the divorce. She admitted she had been afraid of my father's resources, of losing entirely. I heard her words, but they came wrapped in years of silence, and it would take more than a few sessions to untangle what was apology and what was regret. Dr. Mendoza asked me what I needed. The answer came clearer than I expected boundaries. No more decisions made over my head, no more secrets tucked into drawers. I wanted my life written in my own handwriting, not theirs. With Judith's help, I drafted conditions for my father. Any contact would be supervised. No private meetings. No late-night calls designed to wear me down. Financial records had to be transparent. No more pretending poverty while money changed hands behind my back. I signed the statement myself, the ink drying like proof that my voice mattered. Outside the legal battles, I started piecing together an ordinary life in Santa Fe. Elena helped me enroll at the local high school. Its Adobe-style campus so different from the sprawling halls I had known in Portland. I felt like an intruder at first, but slowly the rhythm of classes began to anchor me. In the afternoons, I picked up shifts at a cafe near the plaza. I wiped tables, poured coffee, and learned the names of regulars who asked about my day without expecting polished answers. Earning my own paycheck, however small, steadied me in ways therapy couldn't. It wasn't perfect. Trust with Elena was still fragile, and my father's shadow lingered, but each step felt like stitching a torn seam. The rules were mine now, written in ink, and I intended to guard them fiercely as the court date drew closer. The courthouse in Multnomah County smelled faintly of polish and paper, a mix of old wood and new authority. I sat beside Elena and Judith at the long oak table, my palms sweating despite the cool air from the overhead vents. Across the aisle, my father leaned close to his attorney, whispering as if this were just another project to negotiate. Celine sat behind him, immaculate as always, her expression unreadable. Judith began with the evidence. The still images from the airport camera. Frozen moments of me standing alone at gate 24 while the rest of them crossed into security. Then came the affidavit from the airline clerk, confirming the count of 5 tickets. Witness statements followed, one from the airport worker who had offered me food, another from the CPS officer who had recorded my account. The judge turned to the financial records next. Copies of support checks traced back years, showing payments that never reached me. Alongside them were the letters my father's words describing birthdays, school events, attempts at contact, all tucked into a drawer I was never meant to find. The silence in the courtroom grew dense. When it was his turn, my father straightened, voice pitched with practiced warmth. He spoke of teen rebellion, of misunderstandings exaggerated by an emotional ex-wife. He insisted he had acted in my best interest, that the Fiji trip was meant to give me space to mature. His lawyer nodded along, framing it as discipline gone wrong rather than abandonment. Then, the judge asked if I wished to speak. My throat tightened, but I stood. I told them what it felt like to watch my family disappear through security while I clutched $200. I told them how every hidden letter carved years of silence between me and the mother I thought had forgotten me. I said it plainly, this was not discipline, not rebellion, but abandonment. The judge listened without interruption. When the ruling came, it was clear. Full custody to Elena. My father would have only supervised visitation until further review. As the gavel struck, my father's face hardened, but I no longer flinched. For the first time, my words had been louder than his. I walked out of the courtroom knowing the next chapter of my life would begin in Santa Fe. When the court papers arrived, finalizing custody, I packed what little I had left and settled into Elena's adobe house as more than a guest. The room at the end of the hall, once bare and temporary, became mine. We spent a weekend repainting the walls a soft shade of blue, the color of clear sky after a storm. The scent of fresh paint clung to my hair, and for the first time in years I felt like the space around me belonged to me. Above my desk, I hung a frame with the boarding pass from Portland Gate 24, the day everything split open. It wasn't decoration, it was a reminder of what I had survived and what I refused to repeat. School in Santa Fe felt unfamiliar at first. Students clustered in groups that had known each other since childhood, and I hovered on the edges. But slowly, I found my way in. A girl named Lila invited me to join her study group. A boy in my history class lent me notes without being asked. Small kindnesses gathered into something larger, the beginnings of belonging. In the evenings, I opened a journal and began writing my story in pieces, snatches of memory from the airport, fragments of courtroom testimony, descriptions of the envelopes hidden in drawers. It started as a way to empty my chest of everything I had carried, but soon it shaped itself into something purposeful. A guidance counselor mentioned a scholarship essay competition, and I realized my story had weight beyond my own healing. Elena and I moved carefully around each other, but the old silence began to thin. She knocked before entering my room, asked instead of assumed. We weren't fixed, but we were trying. And for now, that was enough. 6 months later, the air in Santa Fe had settled into me like a second skin. On a Saturday afternoon, Elena and I walked along Canyon Road, drifting through galleries filled with adobe walls and light spilling across canvases. She lingered over landscapes, and I found myself drawn to pieces that used fragments of broken glass, art rebuilt from what had once been shattered. Back home, a small stack of letters waited on my desk. My father's handwriting was still precise, the ink deliberate. Each letter had been cleared through the supervised visitation program, each one written as though the past were a misunderstanding, as though I could be coaxed into remembering him differently. Sometimes I read them, sometimes I didn't. Either way, they no longer carried the power to unseat me. That night, after Elena had gone to bed, I stood in my doorway for a long moment before turning the lock. The click echoed in the quiet house. The key rested warm in my palm, not a barrier against her, but a symbol that the choice was mine. My space. My rules. I lay down beneath the blue walls, the framed boarding pass glowing faintly in the moonlight. My life had begun with other people writing chapters for me, deciding what I would know, where I would live, who I could trust. But the pages ahead were mine to draft. It was no longer about resisting him or even forgiving him. It was about building something that belonged only to me. And as I closed my eyes, I knew the story I was living was not against my father at all. It was for me.